Good evening. We will begin shortly. Just a reminder, we have interpretation services available in Spanish, Amharic, and Arabic.
Buenas noches, vamos a comenzar en unos minutos. Tenemos interpretación disponible en español, en árabe y también en Amharic. Voy a explicarles cómo ir a la selección de idiomas. Si usted está en su computadora, vaya al globo terráqueo que aparece en la parte de abajo de su computadora, haga clic allí y seleccione español y podrá escuchar esta presentación en español. Si está usando un teléfono celular, vaya por favor a los 3 puntos que están en la parte de abajo derecha donde dice más, haga clic allí. Después seleccione interpretación de idiomas y una vez que haga esto, seleccione español y después haga clic de nuevo en finalizado. Muchas gracias.
ጤና ይስጥልኝ እንዴት አመሻችሁ በአሁኑ ሰዓት በዚህ ሰዓት የቋንቋ ትርጉም አገልግሎት እየተሰጠን ያለው ያንንም ደግሞ የሚጠቀመው በአማርኛ በአረብኛና በስፓኒሽኛ ነው የአማርኛ ቋንቋን ትርጉም አገልግሎት ለምትፈልጉ የዓለም ቅርጽ ያለበትን በመጫን አምሃሪክ የሚለውን በመምረጥ የአማርኛ ቋንቋ ትርጉም አገልግሎት ማግኘት ትችላላችሁ እንዲሁም ደግሞ በስልካችሁና በታብሌት የምትጠቀሙ ደግሞ በስልካችሁ በላይኛው በኩል 3 ነጥብ ያለበትን በመጫን ቋንቋውን በመምረጥ አገልግሎቱን ማግኘት ትችላላችሁ Thank you.
مساء الخير شكرا لحضوركم معنا اليوم بنحب ننوه بأنه الترجمة الفورية مزودة بهذه الاجتماع باللغات الثلاثة بالإضافة للغة الإنجليزية في عندنا العربية الأمهرية والإسبانيولية إذا كنتم عم تحضرون من الكمبيوتر الرجاء الضغط على إشارة الكرة الأرضية لاختيار اللغة المناسبة وإذا كنتم عم تحضرون من التليفون الرجاء الضغط على أسفل الشاشة بالنقاط الثلاثة اختيار اللغات اضغطوا على اللغات المختلفة لتختاروا اللغة العربية مثلا بهذا المجال أو اللغة المناسبة لكم وشكرا لحضوركم.
Ms. Gulick, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know we're wrapping up our week of school before spring break and everybody's trying to get things done. So thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Erica Gulick. I'm the Director of Capital Programs Planning and Design with Alexandria City Public Schools, but I actually have some of my colleagues here who will be doing most of the presentation. I do want to note before we get started, there is a Q&A chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to click on that at any time to submit a question or also use it to submit comments you have throughout the presentation related to the different concepts we'll be presenting you tonight. I would note if you do submit a comment about a concept, it would be great if you identify which one so that later when we're reviewing the notes, we know which one you were referring to. I would just want to provide an update before we get started. Given the amount of feedback we've had over the past few weeks on the concepts, you'll see tonight that we have limited the amount of concepts that we are moving forward from 3 to 2. And I'll now turn it over to Azuka Bartlett, who's our Senior Capital Program Manager, to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. All right, good evening, everyone, again. Our agenda for today is to do an introduction. We'll go over the revised concept presentation, and then we'll do polls and questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Next slide. Where we're in the process, we have gone through a lengthy planning and feasibility study process for this project over 2 years. And currently we're in the concept phase of the project, which is the beginning of the design process. So we're excited to get to the sort of the finish the concept phase with the school board approval in upcoming April 8th meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, and with that, I'll turn it over to Omar Calderon from Perkins Eastman to go over the concepts. Thank you.
Thank you, Azuka. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Your feedback is very valuable to us, and it'll help us discern through many of the options and the thinking that we've done to date. to arrive at a preferred thinking or preferred solution that will carry us and move forward with the school design. So you might remember that the choice of the Mini Howard site is in a way is very direct in that it's very close to the existing King Street campus, and so it affords a great deal of connectivity between the two sites. And in particular, the site where we are locating the school, you might recall, is the area where the fields are currently located. And we do that for a couple of really big important reasons. One is it allows us to maintain the Mini Howard building operational while the new building is built, and so therefore those students don't need to be displaced to another part of the city. You know, and secondly, it really sort of afford a great deal of flexibility in terms of the building location by placing it where the fields are located, and that also physically, it's a little bit closer, if you will, to the King Street campus, and those two reasons are important to us. Next. So just to touch on the interior organization of the building, and I'll ask my colleague Sean to chime in if I've left anything out, but it's important that the school community, the learning environment is organized very clearly in a way that it's easy to navigate and easy to identify its various parts. And we like this idea of the learning commons as the heart of the school. Is that place that when you enter the building, you know that you're in a very different place of learning. And so we are trying to create this very evocative central place that then connects all of the other parts of the school. Part of those parts is the athletic facilities. Physical education and aquatics would have its own pavilion or its own area of the building. And that part of the building wants to be fairly close to where the fields are, so that there's a great deal of connectivity between those two parts. Additionally, we then have the learning communities, which are on the right-hand side of the diagram here. And almost, I like to think of these as almost like schools within the school, where you have classrooms, you have CTE laboratories, you have sciences, all distributed along these neighborhoods, creating what I like to think about as school within the school, sort of breaking the scale of the school down into a smaller community of learners. So we've taken these large overarching organizational principles that we've been discussing with the school for several months now, and actually predating our involvement with the project, there's been discussions about this kind of organization for a number of years now, into three concepts, and we call them the hand concept, the crescent concept, and the pinwheel concept. And these are organizational ideas that take everything you see on the left-hand side of the slide and places it on the site in a way that is meaningful, that is connected, and that in a way that works for the students. And so we're going to take a closer look at two of these concepts, as Erica said to us earlier, in that we've taken a lot of the feedback that we've received over the past several weeks to narrow down the possibilities. And so we want to talk to you, have a conversation with you tonight about the hand concept and the pinwheel concept at the bottom. So as we said, the concept that's not moving forward is the crescent concept. And I think primarily one of the big reasons why this concept did not move forward is how much of the site was being absorbed by the building, that in somehow creating a building that would house all of the things that the school needs for to function, a lot of the site was being used for the building. And so this resulted in less of the site to be available for other things. So for that reason, among others, this concept, we steered away from this concept, and the other two gained favor because it seemed the other two were using the site just a little more efficiently. Next. So we're going to talk about the hand concept first. And so you can see here, it's a massing, a little picture of the massing of the building. illustrating how the building sits on the site. And we should point out that the internal planning of the building allows for classrooms to be oriented to maximize the absorption of daylight. And this is really important to us because in doing so, we maximize the opportunities for the building to decrease its energy utilization. We have these really high aspirational goals for net zero energy, which is another way of saying that the building will use as much energy as it produces throughout the year, and therefore creating this net zero energy functionality. It also, it's another way of describing learning environments that actually make the sustainable features of the building available to the students and part of the educational curriculum, if you will. So the building as a teaching tool is an idea that that we like very much and we aspire to do. And that's everything that I just described now is not exclusive to this concept, but it's also takes part or plays a big role in the other concept as well. The gymnasium is this facility that it's this volume towards the top of the image there that's facing the fields. And so we like that adjacency as well because we put like uses next to like uses. So we like that idea. And then you can see in this concept, there's a courtyard facing to the east. And that courtyard is adjacent to the parking areas, which we'll talk about in a moment. And so it just creates a very convenient way to access the building from two directions. Next. So just to touch briefly on the floor plans, this is a concept that is organizes all of the learning spaces in 4 levels. The first floor on the upper left, you see that there's a gray zone to the left of the drawing. That gray zone is meant to indicate the fact that the building is sitting on the topography of the site in a way that it's sort of tucked against the hillside, if you will. You might recall that the site has a lot of topography change, so it's very high on the west and very low on the east. And so this building, when it sits on the site, has the potential for being entered into the heart of the school from 2 different levels. So the arrow on the right on the first floor enters from the lower elevation from the parking. And then there would be an arrow on the left on floor number 2. If you can point to the entrance on floor number 2 on the left-hand side. Yep, right there, entering into the heart of the school. So you see the 2 wings of academic spaces, which is all the blue, are classrooms and laboratory spaces. They're organized on those wings facing north and south, as I've described. And everything is gravitating around this heart of the school middle, which has a lot of the other shared components in something we like to call the Creative Commons, which serves also as the dining venue for the students. Floors number 3 and number 4 are fairly similar in that they have the traditional wings of classrooms that we see there on the lower levels, but also you see the gymnasium facilities on the upper floors, and those are the orange spaces on the left-hand side that you see there. One aspect of the planning of this building is how we were able to stack the gymnasium on top of the pool. And this is critical because those are big spaces that require a lot of land for them to exist. And so by creatively stacking all of those athletic spaces in the same zone, we're able to condense the footprint and be able to do more with the site. Can you have the next slide, please? So here's an overall view of the massing of the building on the site. And so you see the building, the hand concept on the right-hand side. On the left, you see the fields. And so it's a kind of platform, sort of a level platform on the side of the site. And then another platform on the left-hand side, a smaller rectangle that's meant to illustrate perhaps other athletic spaces like tennis courts, perhaps. And then in between them, in between the building and the fields, it's a vehicular drop-off for buses. So we start to now see how the site organizes vehicular movement. So we keep the buses in the center using the existing curb cut that exists in the site to congregate all the buses there. And then vehicular access in the form of cars on the east side has its own dedicated entrance to the east. And therefore the two remain separated and facilitates vehicular movement, also facilitates pedestrian movement, the movement of students in and out of the building in a safe manner. Now, go to the next slide, please. Now, let's talk about options, because with each building option, there's multiple ways in which we can organize the site. So I just described what you see on the screen, which we call option A. That is, the buses come in and out where the existing curb cut is in the center of the plan. The cars come in and out on a new curb cut that would be established along somewhere along the eastern portion of the site, leading into a parking area that also then leads into the courtyard, and then that's how you would enter the building. So the buses are in the center there, and then west of the buses, it's all of the recreational facilities. The entrances, building access, is denoted here by the red arrows. And so that's the entrances, the main entrances to the building. So we have one in the courtyard. And then we also have one there in the center of the plan next to the buses. And this would be the entrance that would be clearly seen from Braddock Road, if you will. There's another way of doing the site, and we call that option B. And option B is the same building idea, same parking scenario to the east as you saw before, but this time we take the buses and we align them along Braddock Road. Why would we do that? We have done that in order to, if you notice now the fields in the school, as a student or a visitor or pedestrian, you can walk from the gymnasium pool area into the fields without having to cross the street, without having to cross cars or buses or anything like that. And that idea, I think, has its merits. Now, it does require that the buses then move to another part of the site, which in this case, they go along Braddock Road. Now, this organization also allows the buses to come in on the existing curb cut that you see there on Braddock, come in a one-way loop, line up, pick up and drop off students, and then exit on the other existing curb cut that exists on the site at the western end of the property. At that point, the bus has the choice to be able to do a right turn to continue to go west, or do a left turn to then go east to other parts of the city. So those are the two site options that are associated with the same building idea, what we call the hand. Can go to the next slide, please. So then lastly here, we have some illustrations of other buildings that we have seen, some that are our own buildings that we've designed in other places, other the design of others that reflect on this idea of the hand concept. And you can see that some of the building masses, the idea of pairing things into almost like sibling buildings that happen to be connected together. When we've seen these things, they reminded us of what we were trying to do here, which is, you can imagine almost like a pair of buildings, siblings that happen to be connected together that can have a same kind of design idea. And so they're really meant to be illustrations. They're not really meant to say, oh, it has to look like any one of these buildings, but it's really just to illustrate the concept of pairing, a pairing of buildings that might have some similarity with one another. At the bottom of the slide here, we can see something that is significant for the planning of any building that we put on the site, and that is the topography. And you can see that there is roughly a 65 feet, as we have measured, changing grade from the left dashed red line to the right hand dashed red line. Can't even say that. And then the building building, it's nestled in between that, right? And so whatever building we place in there has to negotiate the topography, but it's our take that you can actually leverage it to a positive effect for the design of the school. So we can move on to the next exhibit. So let's examine the pinwheel concept next. And the pinwheel concept is a building concept that organizes the same classrooms, the same laboratories that you saw in the previous concept, slightly different. Rather than a pairing of almost, let's call them sibling buildings, what we see here is a collection of pavilions that happen to be connected by a third thing, a smaller third thing in the middle. And so this sort of kind of going around gravitation of these elements around the center remind us of a pinwheel, right? Sort of spinning around this central area, the central core. So we still have the same, as I said, the same programmatic elements. So nothing has been lost, and we still have great daylight opportunity for all of those learning spaces. So we have not, given up on that with this concept, right? We still have great daylight, great opportunities for a sustainable design. So next. So the difference become more evident when you start to look at the plan on how we organize this. And so you can see, we can look at any one plan in here, but let's focus in on floor number 3, which has, you can see the blue areas are the learning spaces, the classrooms. The lighter blue is the laboratories, and then the kind of teal color is the CTE and art spaces. So all of that is gravitating around this center space, this heart of the school space, which has the distributed dining venues in what we call the Creative Commons. You also see to the north the gymnasium, and has a little bit different orientation as we saw in the previous concept, but still observing this idea of stacking the gymnasium over the pool, right? We like that idea because by condensing the footprint, as I said before, we can do more with the site. We still have a little bit of a courtyard space over where it says floor number 3. That's an outdoor courtyard space, which would give us access from the school to the fields. And you'll see that in the site plan that we'll illustrate in a moment. Another significant difference between this and the previous concept is the fact that it's a very condensed footprint. It's a very tight footprint. Now, that tight footprint comes as a result of going to a 5th floor. So this concept here at the bottom of the page, you see that there is a 5th level to this building on this concept. Now, that idea of going to the 5th floor, as I said earlier, gives us the capacity to condense the footprint and be able to find a fit to the site that then allows us to do perhaps even a little more with the site. Next. So here is an illustration of a model of the building as it sits in the site. And incidentally, as you're looking at these images, every little change in the topography. So if you look closely at the model, there's almost like there's steps in them. So every step that you see there is about a 2-foot change in elevation. So you can see that there's many of them as you move from west to east. It really points to, just graphically points to the changes in elevation that exist in the site. The site shows the same program pieces as we saw before. So you see the fields, which is that big rectangle there in the center, and then the little one to the west of that, which is the tennis courts and some of the other program elements. And then on this one, and we'll get into the site plan in a minute, we see the parking area for cars on the east side, and you can see that there are 2 curb cuts now associated with this. And one is for going in, and then the other one is for going out. And then that allows us to have a little bit of a drop-off zone right in front of the building, right in front of where the front door is. Next. So here is the site plan idea option A for the pinwheel concept. And like the previous concept, we looked at two different site plan ideas. So the first one is option A, which has the buses in the center of the site, much like what you saw before, and then the cars on the east with those two new curb cuts to facilitate movement and pickup and drop off. And you can see there's a dashed line along the front of the building. That would be where the cars can line up during that queuing time. Also associated with this plan, and I failed to mention this with the previous plan, but it also exists in the other idea, is the school expansion. Flexibility for the future is something that we have continuously heard from a variety of stakeholders. And so both plans allow for this, for future flexibility. We don't know what that need will be in the future, but right now the plan really needs to make room for, say, 15, 20 years from down the line. The school needs extra space for the development of new programs, let's say. Well, that space could be made available in the site if we plan and position the building carefully, and these two options allow for that, permit for that. Next. So then we looked at a second option for the site. And so what we're seeing here is what happens if we place the buses like we saw before along Braddock Road, creating this pedestrian-friendly zone between the fields and the building. And then the rest of the site plan from the eastern point, the parking areas really remains the same. There's no changes there, but it's really more illustrating that both of these plans are flexible enough to adapt to either site condition or either site idea. Next. So here we are at the end of the pinwheel section, showing some examples of our own work. Some of the work is the work of others, of buildings that remind us of these kind of forms. And I think that somebody described this form as this building shape as feeling smaller, even though there was an added story, the fifth floor, that there was something about the smaller components being joined together into a larger whole that made the composition feel like it was a kind of a smaller building, if that made sense. And so you see there at the bottom a section through the site showing the various topography elevations and how it's changing and how the building really tries to nestle into that and make use of it for its internal planning. Next. So here we have come to the point in the presentation where we're going to ask for your feedback. And so there will be a prompt in the screen here shortly that asks you about the option A or the option B of the site options. Which one do you like best? And so this is I think you can only choose one of the three. It's either option A, the bus loop between the fields and the school building. Option B, bus loop along Braddock Road. Or a third option, you like both options, both option A and B. So if you can give us your feedback on that, we would be very grateful. The second question, and it's a multiple choice question, so you can select more than one thing. The first one is safe vehicular and pedestrian access. You know, how well does the concept that you like separate pedestrians from cars? Relationship / proximity of the fields to the school building. Which concept in your mind, or is that an important reason for your selection on the first question? Parking options for fields. I think one aspect that we need to remember is that the fields will be in use in the weekends. And so having proximity to parking would be useful for those that are using the fields either after hours or during the weekend. The layout of the fields and the courts. Is that something that influences your choice? And the last item is flexibility for future expansion, which I touched on at the end there, and both concepts address it in a slightly different way. But is that an important aspect for your decision? So if you can help us with those and hit submit, we would appreciate it. Just give a few moments there for you to give us your feedback. And I should also remind everyone that there will be information at the end of the presentation on how to get in touch with the school if you had feedback that perhaps you didn't think about, or you know, the thought came later after the presentation. There's going to be a vehicle for you to be able to share your other insights. And so here's the results. So we see here that option A appears to be edging out option B in terms of, it's like, although both option A and B received 11%, so I would say it's a fairly close analysis there between the two options. So thank you for that. And then on the second question, the relationship proximity of the fields to the school building seemed to be overwhelmingly a decision point for people. So thank you for those for the answers to those couple of questions. So now let's move on to the building proper. And so we showed we walked through the two concepts, the hand concept and the pinwheel concept. The hand concept, I described it as this kind of building that has almost like siblings in terms of the classroom wings, creating this courtyard space in between. And then we have the pinwheel concept, which takes the same program with the same level of quality, but organizes a little bit different so that the classrooms are in the gymnasium are these volumes that are rotating around this heart of the school space. And so we have some questions around that, which will pop up on the screen now. So the first question is, which building option, based on what you've heard here today, do you like best? The hand concept or the pinwheel concept? And then a second question, for which of the following reasons do you like that particular option? So this, again, a multiple choice. So you've made a selection in question number 1. Now tell us what really influenced that choice. Is it the relationship of the building massing to the neighborhood? And you know, this perhaps requires a little bit of explanation. Each building has a slightly different massing idea. And so do you feel, do you have any reactions to how the massing of the building, that shape of the building as I've described it, and its relationship to the context, to the neighborhood? And by neighborhood, there's also there's both the residential neighborhood, but there's also the shopping center to the east, Bradley Shopping Center to the east, and of course there's Braddock Road along the south. Relationship to the King Street campus. You know, do either one of these forms have any bearing in your thinking as to how they might relate to the building that exists today at King Street? The organization of the building, there's a great deal of distinction between the two. You have a pair of wings on the one, and then you have the pinwheel idea on the other. The courtyard / outdoor space options, you know, how well does that influence your choice? And flexibility for future expansion. Does that weigh into your decision making, one option or the other? So with that, we'll let that sit there on the screen for a minute while you help us understand, help us discern through the two options. And so the polls are showing us that you've all fairly evenly split, I would say 52 to 48%, with Pinwheel just a couple of percentage points ahead. We thank you for that. And number two, organization of the building played a big role in your choice, with 72% saying so. So thank you all for your feedback. As I said earlier, it's invaluable to us. Help us discern through the options, making sure that we continue developing the right design, the right solution for your place. So with that, I'll hand it over to Azuka. But before I do, I want to just describe what you're seeing here on the screen. The criteria that we just used to evaluate the various concepts that you help us evaluate the concepts by has an expanded version, which you see here on the screen. And this is the criteria that we use to evaluate the various concepts. And most of them have to do with what we call design patterns, which are those kinds of different little ideas that influence the planning of the school. So you might see things listed in here like interdisciplinary communities, flexibility and adaptability, integrating the arts, right? Arts, that's not something that you go down the hall to go find, but that arts is something that happens among the mix of everything else that's happening in the school. And you can see here that the two concepts really light up green on all of the marks, with the exception of the one little mark there, which is just a yellow. But all of this to say that both concepts are fairly equal in their capacity to supply the best learning solution for your students. And you, of course, see the grayed out section in the center, which is the concept that we decided not to move forward because it just didn't seem to pair out as well on many of the categories as the other two. So now I will hand it over to Azuka, who will walk us through some of the logistics, the project timeline, and a few other things of importance. Azuka?
Thank you very much, Omar. As you're all aware, we're going through a parallel design process of the educational program redesign, and the design and construction of the building and site. We are in the design process of on the bottom half, you're seeing in the purple, we're in the early design phase for the school building process. And the anticipated occupancy is fall of 2024 for the Mini Howard redevelopment. Next slide, please. We've done a preliminary budget analysis, and out of the total allocation for the high school project construction, we have projected $150 million. As we prioritize our educational spaces, the teaching and learning spaces, common areas, and shared spaces such as gymnasium, they total up to approximately $150 million. On the right-hand side under orange, you're seeing some optional programs that are still in the evaluations, which includes aquatic pool, underground parking, and co-located partner use spaces. As I mentioned, those are not within the ACPS budget of $150 million, and we are still working through the feasibility and financial options for these optional programs. Next slide, please. We are nearing the end of the engagement for the concept phase of the project. So this is our last meeting for the concept phase of concept design. And we're anticipating for the school board to make a decision on one of these concepts on April 8th meeting. And we'll follow up with that decision with our superintendent's advisory team on April 12th. Thank you. Next slide. And here's the link for the superintendent's advisory team meeting that's happening after this meeting. Our high school project email address is on the screen, and the project link is also on the screen as well if you'd like to check us out. So with that, I would like to take questions. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the Q&A feature of the webinar. Thank you.
Zuka, we have a question from you want to start that?
Omar, would you like to answer that question? Would the pool get natural light?
Yes, very good question. Thank you. Thank you for that. And the answer is yes. By virtue of how we're nestling the building on the side of the hill, we're trying to create a taller volume to the pool so that that daylight really comes from a high place into the space and not really sort of at the level of the pool deck. The pool deck would be much lower, but the windows would be high on the space. Thank you for that question. So there's a question about the DCHS stands for the co-location of space.
So DCHS spaces include the early childhood programs, as well as the community, I'm going to call it.
Calling it a family resource suite,
Yes.
Which provides a variety of different services for families and students as well.
Yeah, I think the question was, hey, it's Erica just jumping in. I think the question was, what does DCHS stand for? And it stands for the Department of Community and Human Services, I want to say. But Kate Garvey, I know you're on the line if you want to just go ahead and answer.
That's correct. It is the Department of Community and Human Services. Thanks.
We do have another question, Azuka.
Which parking layout provides more space or better space for bicycle parking? Omar, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, of course. Yes. This is an important issue, and thank you for the question. So that is something that we'll be diving into in greater detail in the next stages of design. And what you're asking, what I think is at the root of your question is other modalities of accessing the site, bicycle being one of them. And so we put great importance in this, and so there will be safe, convenient access for bicycle racks and bicycle parking around the school. And those would be located ideally very close to the entrances. So if you notice, we have these plaza spaces that are being associated with points of entry. And so they're large enough that we can segment certain areas to be able to safely keep bicycles, and so that they can be part of the space, integrated into the space, and not something that we think about after the fact. Oh, it looks like they're placing a graphic for me on the screen. And so you can see there on both concepts, the hand concept where the left red arrow is, that's a plaza space. And in that space, we can see bicycles happily coexisting with everything else that needs to happen along the entry. And then on the pinwheel concept, you see the plaza space there to the right there, yes, big enough to be able to have an area where bicycles can safely be housed. So thank you. We thank you again for the question.
The next question is, how was the number of needed parking spaces determined, and would either of these options meet parking needs without the parking garage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So parking, it's anything related to cars is of course a big deal, a big question. And so right now we believe to be providing enough spaces for the staff and additional visitors to the school as they may happen from time to time. And we're trying to do so without the need of a parking structure. The number is largely determined by the zoning ordinance. And so that's really the place of beginning for us, as well as some of the spaces that may be associated with the DCHS portion of the building. I don't know if Erica or Azuka have anything else to add to that, but that's where we are on the parking question.
No, I think I apologize. Someone is vacuuming outside the office, so hopefully it's not too loud. So we talk a lot about the need for parking. I think, as Omar may have said, the code requirement at the high school level is 1 per 10 students for student capacity. In just our evaluation of King Street, we probably use more like 1 to 6 or 7. That's partially because it's overcrowded, but also because we just have more staff than the parking code accommodates. So we're aiming for somewhere between 160 to 200 spaces, given that this will be a 1,600 student school.
Okay, I think that was our last question. Unless anyone has any other questions or comments, I think this adjourns our meeting. And thank you again so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate your feedback. It's very important to us, and it helps our recommendation for our school board for their decision as well. Thank you very much. Oh, we have another question. Another question came in. What about Erica, would you like to answer the question, or like me?
Sure. So with student parking, that kind of 1 to 6 ratio I referenced that we experience at King Street does include student parking. And that's the reason that planning and zoning has the 1 to 10 ratio at the high school level to accommodate student parking. When we build elementary schools, our code requirement is only 1 space for every 25 students, so it's much less. So accommodating for student parking is kind of built into that ratio. Thank you for the question. That helps clarify. Okay. Well, I think we will go then to our advisory group meeting. Again, the public can view that meeting. You won't be able to continue to submit questions, but you are able to view if you would like. And advisory team members, for those who participate in the community meeting, we'll see you over there. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.